Harakiri, or seppuku, is the ritual suicide of the samurai in accordance with their code of honor, Bushido. Often reserved for an honorable death, a harakiri is also to be performed when faced with great shame. Harakiri is also a 1962 film directed by a Japanese director named Masaki Kobayashi. Before I can go ahead and deconstruct the ideas in the film, I'll have to tell you what it's all about. For context, the film takes place in Japan during a time when the Tokugawa shogunate had just risen to power after a civil war, displacing many clans and turning their samurai into ronin, wandering samurai who couldn't find jobs and were not to be trusted. The Tokugawa shogunate would continue its reign for 250 years. One of the clans under its protection was named the Ii clan. The movie opens with a shot of a mysterious set of samurai armor enshrouded in mist. This sets up the tone of the movie going forward, establishing the amount of respect held for a symbol of samurai honor. A ronin named Hanshiro Tsugumo arrives at the Ii clan's estate, and he requests that they provide him with a space with which to commit harakiri. The senior counselor at the estate is instantly suspicious, because there's been a trend lately of ronin who make the same request, expecting to be given a handout or even a job. No one wants someone actually disemboweling themselves in the courtyard after all. Suspecting Tsugumo is also lying about his intentions, the counselor decides to tell him a cautionary tale about the last guy who approached them requesting a space for harakiri. His name was Motome Chijiwa, and he approached the Ii clan's estate in the exact same manner. They wanted to end the trend of appeasing beggars, so the counselor went to 3 senior samurai who decided to make an example out of him. They lured Chijiwa in by telling him he's earned an audience with their lord, only to then tell him the lord was so impressed with his dedication to honor that he couldn't possibly dissuade Chijiwa from killing himself, in perhaps the most egregious fuck you move ever. They take a look at Chijiwa's sword and see that it's just bamboo. They tell him he's going to have to proceed with the harakiri using the bamboo instead of an actual sword. It's at this point that it's clearly not about honor anymore. If he were trying to uphold his own honor, he'd already have failed because he sold his sword to survive. Chijiwa begs the clan for a 2-day break and promises to come back. They force him to follow through on the harakiri, and he dies a brutal, cruel death. After the counselor's story, Tsugumo looks virtually unfazed. He assures the counselor that his intentions of committing harakiri are genuine. Shortly after, Tsugumo finally sits before the clan, expected to disembowel himself. Now for some context. Harakiri used to be entirely self-inflicted, but in order to cut down on suffering, it employed the use of a second, who was meant to cut the subject down before they could die by disembowelment. Tsugumo declared that he wanted to choose his own second, since that was his dying right by honor. The counselor decided to grant him that wish, and asked him who he'd like as a second. Tsugumo names Hayato, Umenosuke, and Hikokuro, the 3 senior samurai who organized Chijiwa's brutal death. All 3 of them claimed to be sick the day Tsugumo arrived at the palace. Tsugumo reveals to everyone in attendance that he actually knew Chijiwa, because he was Chijiwa's father-in-law. He tells Chijiwa's true story, and in it he reveals that his daughter and her son were gravely ill, and Chijiwa's plea to the Ii clan was a last-minute attempt to get a small amount of money or even a job. Because he died an untimely death instead, they died soon after. Tsugumo finishes off his story by revealing that he tracked down the 3 samurai who killed Chijiwa, and cut off their top knots, a disgrace that even harakiri can hardly atone for. Instead of owning up to it and killing themselves like they'd ask of anyone else, however, they each decided to conceal themselves and pretend to be sick, waiting for their top knots to grow back. It's at this point that Tsugumo calls Bushido nothing more than a facade, and the counselor orders the entire clan to murder Tsugumo unceremoniously. Tsugumo fights them off, and he even manages to kill a few of them, but they quickly begin to overwhelm him with sheer volume. Keeping true to his word, he strikes his own sword into his belly and begins disemboweling himself, before being shot down by firearms. Harakiri is, on the surface, the simple tale of one man getting his revenge against the samurai clan that doomed his family to their fate. It's why it makes for such an enjoyable watch. On my first watch, the film felt more like a mystery that was quickly unraveling, a sort of personal horror story for the Ii clan, where they slowly learn that they massively fucked up. As you begin to see more of the story from Hanshiro's perspective, however, you see that he is an vengeful hero so much as a sorrowful victim. He's so full of pain and suffering that his only goal now is to make it clear to the powers that be that the samurai code he had spent his whole life living by was nothing more than a manipulative lie, and the morals it supposedly stood for were lofty lies as well, used to benefit those who would use it for their own ends. The Bushido Code embodies 8 virtues: justice, courage, compassion, respect, integrity, honor, loyalty, and self-control. In gleefully murdering Chijiwa, the House of Ii displayed none of these traits. In fact, their cruel damnation of him painted a much different picture. Power-mad dictators, with the power to do whatever they want in the name of justice, peace, and the greater good. In most samurai films, the samurai are virtuous heroes, but that image is completely turned on its head in Harakiri. Harakiri is an incredibly symbolic film. In her book, Japanese Film Directors, Adi Bach breaks down 5 symbols that support Harakiri's themes. The first symbol on display, the armor. One of the most harrowing symbols of the samurai's influence in the film is the warrior's armor on display in the House of Ii. It opens the film, surrounded by mist and intrigue. And in another film, this would very well be an icon of good and virtue. The House of Ii regards this armor with the utmost respect, and they even asked its forgiveness when they disturb it with Chijiwa's ritual suicide. This high regard for the armor is in contrast with its fate later in the film, when Tsugumo desperately and angrily knocks it over during his duel, revealing it to be empty, lifeless, and hollow. The second symbol, as detailed by Bach, is the clan's daily record book. It rounds out both the beginning and end of the movie through narration. In the beginning, it's used to set the context for the day and age, as well as introduce us to the only thing of note to happen in their time. In the end, the record book tells us only that Tsugumo's suicide happened, and nothing else, as the truth would serve only to discredit both the clan's honor and pride. It represents that history is only history, as rewritten by the victors, and not an honest representation of what truly happened. The third symbol is the samurai sword. For a samurai, stature is largely indicated by their top knot and their samurai sword. However, for Chijiwa, the cruel reality of poverty had more sway over him than the supposed honor of the blade, and he sold it to survive. Tsugumo is shocked at the prospect of selling his samurai sword, as his identity is so closely tied to the idea of a samurai's honor. However, he soon learns that some things are more real than the made-up codes he always lived by. Without a true sword, Chijiwa could never know an honorable death, since losing a sword, in the eyes of Bushido, was a shameful offense on its own already. Despite this, the Ii clan forced him to commit suicide with the bamboo sword, knowing that this forced Harakiri could never truly be honorable, making it little more than murder. The bamboo sword in itself becomes a symbol of the power poverty has over powerless men. When faced with starvation and ruin, honor will not suffice. Respect does not pay the bills, and desperate people must give in to harsh reality. The fourth symbol is the other symbol of the samurai, that of the top knot. Tsugumo doesn't enact blunt, direct, fatal revenge upon the 3 men that decided Chijiwa's fate. Instead, he sets his sights on the samurai code itself, and how hypocritical it is. Tsugumo hunts down the 3 men and faces down with each of them honorably, but he doesn't kill them. Instead, he removes their top knots, the ultimate symbol of dishonor. All of them prove to be dishonorable cowards, who would rather feign sickness than reveal to the public that they had their top knots removed. If they were honest men, they'd have followed through on the harakiri they demand of anyone else. Instead, they chose to hide. Tsugumo aims to show those in power that if they were also at death's door, they too would willfully cast aside honor. The last symbol is the samurai code's rhetoric. After being forced by the Ii clan to commit to his ritual suicide, Chijiwa, horrified that he's being made to follow through with the harakiri, begs for a 2-day break to leave and come back. Presumably, he would have used this time to escape or to get his affairs in order with his dying family. The Ii clan refuses his request, since they think a samurai should be bound to their word. However, if they really believed this, then they would have placed their faith in his promise to return after his break. The honor practiced by the House of Ii in Harakiri is a hollow one, meant only to excuse cruel practices as honorable, as though there were no other choice. It's a code of honor twisted to mean whatever those in power want it to mean, not a true set of morals meant to guide their actions. In contrast to the cowardly likes of the Ii clan, Tsugumo is by all accounts a truly honorable samurai who follows the Bushido code in earnest. Because of that, it's ironic he's treated with disdain by the Ii clan, because he's more honorable and capable than they could ever hope to be. This is a trait on display in a couple of the film's most important scenes. One of these scenes is his duel with Hikokuro, the only one of the 3 senior Ii samurai to display any honor in his actions. He seeks out Tsugumo in his hovel and challenges him to a duel in the middle of a field. He proves to be difficult for Tsugumo to defeat, as Hikokuro is in his prime and he's mastered traditional combat. However, he lives in a time of peace and hasn't seen true combat like Tsugumo has. After struggling with him shortly, Tsugumo offers him a double disgrace, cutting his sword in half and removing his top knot. The second of these scenes is when the counselor orders the entire clan to murder Tsugumo on the spot. Tsugumo, despite being starved and tired, fights through numerous fatal injuries and kills several of them on his own. In the face of certain death, Tsugumo shows the Ii clan a true warrior's death. Not wishing to give the Ii clan the satisfaction of his defeat, he pierces his own body with his sword and begins conducting a brutal and true Harakiri. Even though Tsugumo is our hero, we see that he resorted to Harakiri only in the face of his own mortality. He didn't resort to it because he was forced to, or because he wanted to die a warrior's death. He did it to show the Ii clan what true samurai honor looked like. Samurai's honor they could never hope to achieve. Even then, the death was shocking, brutal, and disgusting. The Ii clan cut it short when, in a shameful act of cowardice, especially by samurai standards, they shot Tsugumo dead. Harakiri's anti-establishment themes didn't materialize out of thin air. Its director, Masaki Kobayashi, was so passionately anti-authoritarian that he was often at odds with studios. Kobayashi was born in Hokkaido in 1916. After studying East Asian art and philosophy at Waseda University, he began his career as an assistant director at Shochiko Studios. However, shortly after that, his career was put on hold when he was drafted into the Imperial Japanese Army in 1942. In his own personal act of rebellion, Kobayashi refused to rise above the rank of private. When asked about the war itself, he said it was the culmination of human evil. When he returned from the war is when he really started to butt heads with studios. According to Joan Mellon in her essay, Harakiri, Kobayashi in History, his first major film, The Thick-Walled Room, was shelved for 4 years by Shochiku Ofuna because the film suggested that wartime atrocities should not be attributed to the minority, such as low-ranking officers and soldiers, but to war leaders in the higher ranks. Similarly, The Human Condition condemns Japan's imperialist policy at the time, openly criticizing Japanese occupation in China. Of all his films, however, Harakiri most bluntly connects with his themes of anti-authoritarianism. Mellon suggests that Kobayashi's critique of the establishment in Harakiri directly connected with his views at the time, where it condemned individual submission to the group and the hierarchical structures of the Tokugawa era, so it condemned them in the present. This anti-authoritarian series is a project I wanted to start, because whenever I see anti-fascist themes employed in pieces of art, they're usually played down by certain people as being just fiction, with no relevance to real life. What these people don't realize is that fiction is a mirror of real-life struggles, politics, and divisions. Even though Harakiri takes place in 1630, its heavy anti-fascist themes are just as prevalent today as they were in 1630 or in 1962. Just as Tsugumo fought to reveal the hypocrisy of the Tokugawa shogunate, he was fighting to reveal the hypocrisy inherent in the hierarchical economic structures that pervaded Japan in 1962. Similarly, Tsugumo's struggles carry on into today. There aren't masterless ronin wandering the countryside, but honor was always a facade for the samurai, in the same way that the capitalist dream is a facade for life in America. The American myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and building a legacy for yourself from nothing prevails, but it ignores the millions of families left in its wake. Every success story is built on the backs of people who suffer just to keep their lives afloat. People may hold on to the rhetoric of the American myth and the American dream, but ultimately, just like the Bushido Code, it's nothing more than a facade. Harakiri reminds us that those who hold that power don't hold on to it forever and are destined to crumble under its weight.